before the world wakes up, before notifications begin to compete for your attention, before responsibilities start making demands on your strength, there is a sacred window of time where destiny is most impressionable. Early morning prayer is not a religious routine. It is a spiritual posture. It is the deliberate decision to let heaven speak before earth does. Many people start their day reacting, but those who understand the power of early prayer begin their day responding to God, to purpose, and to direction. When you pray early, you are not trying to convince God to bless your day. You are positioning yourself to discern what He has already prepared. There is a difference between asking God to follow you into your plans and surrendering your plans to follow Him. Morning prayer realigns your spirit so that your steps are not driven by pressure, anxiety, or urgency, but by clarity. It quiets the noise within you before the noise around you grows loud. There are battles you will never have to fight publicly if you address them privately in prayer. The morning is when spiritual atmospheres are shaped. Long before words are spoken and actions are taken, decisions are already forming in the unseen. Early prayer is how you step ahead of the day instead of chasing it. It is how you carry spiritual authority into meetings, conversations, and moments that could have gone wrong but didn't. Many people wonder why they feel drained before the day even ends. It is often because they entered the day empty. Prayer is not something you do when you are tired. It is what prevents you from being tired too early. Strength is not always the absence of weakness. It is the presence of God consciousness. When you start your day in prayer, you carry an awareness that you are not alone, not exposed, and not at the mercy of circumstances. Consistency in early morning prayer builds something deeper than motivation. It builds spiritual stamina. Over time, you begin to notice that you are calmer under pressure, wiser in decisions, and more discerning in relationships. This is not accidental. Prayer trains your spirit to recognize divine signals. It sharpens your sensitivity so you know when to move, when to wait, and when to stop. When you rise early to pray, you are declaring that God has the first say in your life, not people, not problems, not fear. You are reminding your soul that no matter what unfolds, you did not step into the day unguarded. You stepped in covered, aligned, and aware. And that awareness alone can change everything about how the day responds to you. Early morning prayer as a spiritual alignment before life begins to speak is about understanding that every day already carries a voice before you step into it. Situations, people, memories, fears, expectations, and unseen forces are all ready to speak into your mind the moment you wake up. If you do nothing, you don't start the day neutral. You start it already influenced. Early morning prayer is the intentional act of choosing which voice defines your inner posture before any other voice is given permission. It is not first about words spoken to God, but about surrendering your attention to Him before your emotions, thoughts, and environment begin to shape you. When you pray early, you are telling your soul not to interpret the day by yesterday's pain or tomorrow's anxiety. You are resetting your inner compass. Alignment means your thoughts, emotions, and expectations are brought back under divine order before pressure introduces confusion. Many people carry yesterday's burdens into today simply because they never paused long enough to release them in God's presence. Morning prayer breaks that cycle by restoring perspective before momentum forms. Once the day gains speed, it becomes harder to redirect, but alignment at the beginning saves you from constant correction later. There is also a spiritual sensitivity that is stronger in the early hours. Your mind is quieter, your defenses are lower, and your spirit is more receptive. In that stillness, clarity flows more easily. You begin to sense direction instead of forcing decisions. You receive peace instead of manufacturing confidence. This is why early prayer is not about length, but attentiveness. Even a short moment of sincere alignment can recalibrate an entire day, because you are allowing God to set the tone rather than reacting to circumstances. Alignment through prayer also establishes authority. When your spirit is aligned, you respond instead of react. Words carry weight because they are not rushed. Choices are cleaner because they are not fear-driven. You move through the day with an inner witness that guides you away from unnecessary conflicts and toward meaningful engagements. This is not mysticism, it is awareness born from communion. You become harder to manipulate emotionally because your center is anchored before distractions arrive. Without early alignment, people often spend the day trying to regain balance they never established. They look for peace in productivity, clarity in noise, and reassurance in people. Prayer before the day speaks saves you from that chase. It positions you to walk through noise without losing stillness, and through pressure without losing direction. Because something within you was already settled before the first demand was made, before the first message arrived, before the world began to speak, and you had already listened to the one voice that truly matters. The mystery of divine advantage activated before human effort lies in the understanding that not all progress is the result of struggle, and not all victories are produced by effort alone. There is a realm where outcomes are influenced before actions begin, and prayer is the doorway into that realm. When you engage God early, you are not trying to work harder than others. You are allowing God to go ahead of you. Divine advantage is not favoritism without reason, but alignment that positions a person where grace amplifies effort, and effort is no longer wasted. Many people exhaust themselves trying to force doors that were never meant to open, simply because they began their day relying solely on their strength. Prayer before activity acknowledges that human ability has limits. It invites divine orchestration into the ordinary moments of life. This is how some people arrive at the right place at the right time, say the right words without rehearsing, and avoid errors they were never aware of. These are not coincidences. They are the quiet outcomes of a life that invites God to shape the day before the day begins. Divine advantage often looks subtle. It may appear as delays that protect you, conversations that shift unexpectedly in your favor, or decisions that feel guided rather than calculated. When prayer precedes effort, wisdom is released before energy is spent. You begin to recognize which battles require action and which require restraint. This discernment alone saves years of unnecessary struggle. Instead of reacting to every opportunity, you learn to move only when grace is present, because progress without grace eventually leads to burnout. There is also a preservation that comes with divine advantage. Early prayer builds a spiritual covering that shields you from avoidable losses. You may still face challenges, but you face them prepared. Why? Our mind is guarded against panic, and your spirit is fortified against discouragement. When things don't go as planned, you recover faster, because your confidence was never rooted in circumstances but in divine guidance. This inner stability becomes a silent strength that others may not understand but cannot deny. Activating divine advantage before human effort also transforms your posture toward work. You stop seeing success as something to chase and begin to see it as something to steward. Effort becomes obedience, not desperation. You work diligently, but you are not anxious, because you trust that outcomes are not entirely dependent on you. This trust produces peace, and peace sharpens focus. In this way, prayer does not reduce effort, it redeems it, ensuring that every step you take is supported by grace, directed by wisdom, and multiplied beyond what human strength alone could ever achieve. Before you even lift your hands to work and the day unfolds ahead of you, why the first voice you hear daily must be God's voice, is rooted in the reality that voices shape direction, and direction determines outcomes. Every day arrives carrying multiple narratives ready to claim your attention. There is the voice of urgency reminding you of what is late, the voice of fear rehearsing what could go wrong, the voice of memory replaying past failures, and the voice of expectation demanding performance. If any of these become the first voice you internalize, they certainly set the emotional and spiritual temperature of your day. You may still pray later, but the tone has already been established by something else. The first voice you hear becomes the reference points against which all other voices are measured. When God's voice comes first, it creates a filter. Pressure may still speak, but it does not dominate. Criticism may come, but it does not define you. Opportunities may arise, but they are discerned rather than rushed. Hearing God first is not always about audible words. It is about awareness, alignment, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you are seen, guided, and upheld before you engage with the world. There is a vulnerability in the early moments of waking. Your mind has not yet built its defenses, and your emotions are not fully armored. This is why anxiety often strikes in the morning. Thoughts feel heavier, worries feel closer, and responsibilities feel overwhelming. Allowing God's voice to meet you in that vulnerable space replaces dread with reassurance. It reminds your soul that you are not entering the day alone, and that nothing awaiting you has taken heaven by surprise. When God's voice is first, it anchors your identity before performance is required. You remember who you are before you remember what you have to do. This is crucial because many people derive their worth from productivity, approval, or results. Morning communion recenters your value in relationship rather than achievement. From that place, you work without striving and serve without resentment. Even correction, when it comes, feels like guidance rather than condemnation, because it flows from a voice you already trust. Hearing God first also sharpens discernment throughout the day. You begin to recognize when a decision feels rushed, when a conversation feels misaligned, or when a step feels premature. This sensitivity is not mystical, it is the fruit of familiarity. Just as you recognize the tone of someone you love, you learn to recognize the nudges of the Spirit when you have listened early. Over time, this practice builds an inner stillness that remains even in chaos, because the loudest voice was never the world's to begin with. It was the one that spoke peace into your spirit before the day demanded answers, and that peace continues to speak long after the morning has passed. Morning prayer, as a shield against unseen battles of the day, is rooted in the truth that not every conflict announces itself. Many of the most damaging battles are subtle, quiet, and internal. They show up as sudden discouragement, unnecessary irritation, mental fog, impulsive decisions, or emotional heaviness with no obvious cause. These are not always psychological accidents. They are often the result of entering the day unguarded. Prayer in the early hours is how you clothe your spirit before exposure, how you establish defense before engagement. Every day carries unseen negotiations that affect outcomes long before visible events unfold. Words will be spoken that test your patience. Opportunities will appear that test your discernment, and moments will arise that attempt to pull you out of alignment. When prayer comes first, it strengthens your inner walls. You may still feel pressure, but it does not penetrate as deeply. You may still encounter provocation, but it does not control your response. This is what spiritual shielding looks like. Not the absence of challenges, but the presence of resilience. Morning prayer sharpens your awareness, so you recognize traps before you step into them. Some battles are designed to waste your energy rather than defeat you outright. Distractions, arguments, and emotional entanglements often drain more than they destroy. Prayer helps you sense when to disengage, when to remain silent, and when to walk away. This discernment preserves strength for what truly matters. Without it, people often spend the day fighting the wrong battles and neglecting the ones that actually shape their future. There's also a covering over your mind that prayer provides. Thoughts are among the primary battlegrounds of the day. Anxiety, Self-doubt and fear often arrive uninvited, especially in moments of transition or pressure. When you have prayed early, your mind has already been reminded of truth. Lies still attempt to speak, but they find less agreement. Peace becomes easier to return to because it was established before the storm began. Prayer as a shield does not make you passive. It makes you prepare. You walk into the day aware that not everything requires a reaction, and not every challenge is meant to be confronted head on. Some victories come from restraint, patience, and timing. Early prayer aligns you with that wisdom. It protects you from overreacting, oversharing, and overcommitting. By the time the day unfolds, something within you has already been fortified. You may not see the battles that were avoided, the mistakes that never happened, or the harm that never reached you, but the evidence of that shield is found in the calm, clarity, and steadiness you carry through the day, knowing you are covered before the first demand was made and guarded before the first challenge arose. How consistency in early prayer builds spiritual authority over time is revealed not in sudden moments, but in quiet accumulation. Authority is rarely dramatic at first. It is formed through repetition, obedience, and faithfulness when no one is watching. Each morning you choose prayer over convenience. You are training your spirit to submit before it leads. Spiritual authority is not about volume, emotion, or length of prayer, but about alignment sustained over time. What you repeatedly honor eventually begins to honor you back. Consistency creates familiarity, and familiarity produces confidence. When you meet God daily before the demands of life, you begin to recognize his ways more easily. Your spirit learns his rhythms, his corrections, and his assurances. Over time, these relations, he produces weight in the spirit. Your words begin to carry clarity, your decisions carry conviction, and your presence carries calm. People may not know why they trust your counsel or sense stability around you, but it is the unseen result of hours spent aligning yourself when others were rushing into the day. Spiritual authority also grows because consistency disciplines the flesh. Waking early to pray when the body prefers comfort builds inner governance. You learn to say no to impulses and yes to purpose. This self-mastery spills into other areas of life. You become less reactive, less easily offended, and less driven by emotion. Authority is strengthened when your spirit leads and your emotions follow, and early prayer trains that order daily. There is also a refining that happens over time. Consistent prayer exposes motives, purifies intentions, and corrects pride gently. Instead of being shaped by success or failure, you are shaped by presence. This keeps authority clean. Power without purity becomes dangerous, but authority built in prayer remains anchored in humility. You learn to depend on God not only in crisis but in routine. That dependence attracts grace, and grace sustains authority. As consistency deepens, resistance changes. Situations that once overwhelmed you begin to lose their intensity. Temptations that once felt strong become easier to resist. Fear no longer controls your decisions the way it once did. This is not because problems disappear, but because your inner stature has grown. Authority is the capacity to remain steady while everything else is moving, and that steadiness is forged in repeated encounters with God. Over time, early prayer builds an inner witness that guides you without noise. You sense when something is off, when a step is premature, or when silence is wiser than speech. This discernment is a mark of authority. You stop forcing outcomes and start stewarding direction. Without realizing it, you begin to command atmospheres simply by being aligned. The consistency that once felt demanding becomes the very source of strength, clarity, and influence that defines how you walk through life day after day. Stepping into the day conscious of God's presence, not fear of outcomes, is the culmination of a life trained in early communion. Fear thrives where uncertainty dominates, and uncertainty grows when people believe everything depends on how well they perform or how events unfold. God consciousness shifts that weight. It reminds your spirit that outcomes are not the ultimate authority over your life. Presence is. When you wake with an awareness of God, you don't enter the day asking what might go wrong, but trusting who walks with you regardless of what happens. Fear of outcomes often comes from living too far ahead of the present moment. The mind runs to future conversations, imagined failures, or worst case scenarios. Prayer draws you back into now. It grounds you in the reality that grace is supplied daily, not in advance for imagined crises. When God's presence becomes your focus, the future loses its power to intimidate you. You still plan, but you do not panic. You still prepare, but you are not paralyzed. This is the freedom that comes from presence-centered living. Being conscious of God's presence also transforms how you interpret delays, detours, and disappointments. Instead of seeing them as signs of failure, you begin to view them as moments within a larger guidance. Fear asks, what if this doesn't work out? Presence responds, God is still here. That awareness keeps your heart steady when things are unclear. You stop measuring the day by visible success alone and begin valuing obedience, peace, and faithfulness. When you walk in God consciousness, pressure loses its urgency. You no longer rush decisions just to escape discomfort. You learn to wait without anxiety and move without hesitation. This balance is rare, but it is cultivated in prayer. Early communion reminds you that you are led, not chased. You are guided, not abandoned. This internal assurance reduces emotional exhaustion because you are not constantly bracing for impact. Fear-driven living often leads to control, overthinking, and self-protection. Presence-driven living produces trust, clarity, and courage. You speak more honestly, love more freely, and take risks with wisdom rather than desperation. Even when outcomes matter, they do not define you. Your identity remains anchored beyond results. As the day unfolds, God consciousness becomes a quiet companion. In meetings, conversations, and moments of decision, there is an inner awareness that steadies you. You are not perfect, and you may still feel moments of doubt, but fear no longer governs your direction. You move forward knowing that even if outcomes shift, God's presence does not. This confidence changes how the day responds to you, because you are no longer driven by what might happen, but anchored in who is with you, carrying peace into uncertainty and walking through the day with assurance that presence is enough for whatever lies ahead.